Have you ever felt it? That strange ache that rises when you are surrounded by people you love and yet your soul feels alone. Not because they have changed, but because you have. The words they speak no longer land where they used to. The laughter rings, but it echoes in a place you no longer live. You smile, you nod, but something inside you has already begun to leave. There is a moment in the life of every chosen one when what once felt like home begins to feel like exile. Not because the place is evil, but because the calling has grown louder than the comfort. You were not made to stay where everyone knows your name. You were made to follow the voice that knows your future. And that voice, more often than not, calls you away. Before God uses a vessel, He empties it. Before He sends you, He separates you. Before He crowns you, He cuts you loose. Not from love, but from limitation. Because what feels like loss is actually the beginning of alignment. The ache you feel is not rejection. It is redefinition. You are not being forgotten. You are being found. And those who cannot see what is on you will be removed before they can interfere with what is in you. This is not cruelty. It is consecration. It is the strange mercy of God to let people walk away before they are able to break what He is building. That is why the conversations feel forced. That is why the connection fades. That is why their absence, though painful, feels strangely peaceful. God is doing something. Quietly, carefully, without announcement. He is removing the noise so you can hear Him clearly. He is thinning the crowd so your spirit can breathe. Because your calling is not for the many, it is for the remnant, and now it begins. The journey into holy separation. The sacred mystery of walking away from those you never thought you could live without. Let us walk in. The jealousy of those who once loved you, the spirit of Cain. It begins in the silence behind their smile. The way their eyes shift when you speak of what God has placed in your spirit. At first, you dismiss it. You tell yourself it's just your imagination. But soon, the warmth fades. The conversations grow cold. The laughter carries a weight it never had before. You have not sinned. You have not changed your love for them. The only thing that has changed is this: God has awakened something in you, and it is starting to show. Jealousy is not always loud. Sometimes it dresses itself in politeness. Sometimes it hides behind old jokes and passive indifference. But the spirit behind it is ancient. It is the spirit of Cain, the one who could not bear to see God's favor on his brother. The one who stood beside the same altar and offered his best but still burned with rage when heaven responded to another. Joseph lived this before the world ever called him great. He dreamed what God showed him. He spoke it in innocence. But what he saw as revelation, his brothers saw as arrogance. What he saw as a future, they saw as a threat. The same mouths that once called him brother began to conspire in hushed tones. And it all began the moment he started to shine. That is the mystery of being chosen. Your light will offend those still clinging to their shadows. God sees what you do not. He sees the hidden bitterness behind the familiar face. He sees the small cracks envy has carved into hearts that once clapped for you. And so, in mercy, He separates you. Not to punish them, not to exalt you, but to preserve what He placed inside you. Because a seed cannot survive in poisoned soil, and your assignment is too fragile to be shared with those who secretly resent your calling. It is not your fault. It is not theirs. It is the cost of chosenness. The first to hurt you will not always be strangers. Sometimes the enemy wears your last name. Sometimes betrayal is born in the same room as your childhood dreams. But just like Joseph, what they meant for harm, God will use for ascension. You will rise, not despite their envy, but because of it. It was the hatred of his brothers that sent Joseph on the road to Pharaoh's palace. And in time, God will cause those who cast you aside to witness the glory they tried to bury. Some pains are not wounds, they are wombs, and jealousy is often the labor that births the next season of your life. What begins as rejection becomes divine release. And when that release comes, something even more painful often follows the command to walk away. The separation before the fire, Abraham's call to leave. There is a moment when the familiar becomes too small for the fire that is beginning to burn inside you. It is not that the place is evil. It is that your destiny can no longer breathe in its air. This is why God came to Abraham not with a plan but with a departure. Go from your country, from your kindred, from your father's house. Leave everything that formed you, so I can transform you. To be chosen is to be pulled, away from names that once defined you, away from systems that once sustained you. When God calls a person, He calls them alone. Not because community is wrong, but because covenant begins in solitude. The deeper your purpose, the fewer people can come. Abraham was not just called to move, he was called to unlearn, to step into a land he had never seen with a trust he had never felt. This is the pattern of every chosen one. God calls you out before He shows you in. He leads you away before He lays anything down. It is not a map, it is a voice, and that voice will tell you when it is time to walk. Walk away from their expectations. Walk away from what makes sense. Walk away from the version of you they think they know. Because the place of comfort can become the place of compromise, and God will not pour glory into a cup still filled with the past. You may feel guilty for leaving, but obedience will always look like rebellion to those who are not called where you are going. Your yes will cost you the comfort of being understood, but your obedience will gain you the voice of God, and that voice will speak louder in the silence that follows your separation. Abraham could not fully see until Lot left. The moment they parted ways, heaven opened. That is not coincidence. That is covenant. There are some promises that cannot be spoken until the wrong voices are gone. Some visions are delayed not because you are unwilling, but because you are too surrounded. The blessing is waiting for the parting. The clarity is waiting for the goodbye. When God begins to call you forward, everything that holds you backward will start to fall apart. Not to hurt you, but to release you. And it is in that holy falling apart that God begins the next mystery. The wilderness, the fire, the refinement. The refining fire requires solitude. Jesus in the wilderness. Before power there is always wilderness. Before the voice echoes through nations, it must first be tested in silence. The Spirit did not lead Jesus into the crowd. It led Him into isolation. 40 days, no disciples, no family, no safety nets, only hunger heat and the hiss of temptation. Not because He had sinned, but because He had been chosen. The wilderness is God's hidden forge. It is where purity is extracted from potential. It is where identity is not just revealed, but proven. In the quiet, every false voice is exposed. In the hunger, every shallow motive is burned away. It is not a punishment, it is a proving ground. And if Jesus, the sinless Son, was led into fire, then so will every chosen one who bears His call. The refining fire strips you. It removes the applause, the distraction, the crutches of comfort. You learn to hear only one voice, the Father's. You learn to live without validation. You learn to resist what once controlled you. And it is there in the furnace of becoming that your spirit is made ready to carry what flesh never could. Joseph had his fire in Egypt, alone, betrayed, forgotten in a foreign land. But it was there that he discovered the voice of God in dreams. It was there he learned to rule his own heart before ruling a nation. David had his fire in caves, running from a king who once sang his praises. But it was there that psalms were birthed. That worship was weaponized. That identity was forged in the fire of rejection. Refinement is not about doing more. It is about becoming less until all that remains is gold, until you no longer need the crowd, until your only desire is the will of the one who called you. And when that moment comes, when the fire has finished its work, you emerge not just alive, but anointed. Because only those who endure the solitude of fire can carry the weight of divine purpose without breaking. But to endure it, you must first understand why the ones who once loved you cannot go with you. Why the familiar becomes blind to the holy. Why sometimes the rejection is not from enemies but from those who claim to know you best. The pain of familiarity when they no longer see you. There is a sorrow that only the chosen carry. Not the sorrow of failure, but the sorrow of being unseen by the very ones who once saw you best. Jesus walked into his hometown not as a child, but as the anointed Son. Yet they could not receive him. They could not hear his words without choking on their own assumptions. Is this not the carpenter? They said it with eyes that still saw the boy who ran through their streets, not the Messiah who walked with heaven's authority. Familiarity is a blinding spirit. It makes sacred things look ordinary. It turns revelation into routine. And when you are chosen, you will find that those closest to your past often cannot accept your future. They knew you when you were weak, and so they cannot receive you when you are strong. They remember your stumbles, and so they cannot believe in your calling. What they see is not who you are, but who you were. This is why God often shields your emergence. Not to hide you, but to protect the weight of what you carry. If Jesus himself could do no great work among those who knew him best, do not be surprised when your gift is dismissed by your family. Do not be shaken when your anointing is mocked by those who remember your flaws. The rejection is not personal, it is prophetic. The same people who once cheered for you may now resist you, not because they hate you, but because they cannot see you. There is a loneliness that comes with being misnamed, a heaviness in knowing that no matter how bright your light, some hearts will never turn toward it. But even this is holy, because when the voices of familiarity fade, the voice of God grows clearer. When their eyes stop seeing, his eyes start guiding. You were not made to be understood by everyone. You were made to obey the one who called you, and sometimes that obedience requires walking in the full weight of misunderstanding, not as punishment but as protection, because what God has placed in you cannot be handled by those who only remember who you used to be. And when that separation finally settles, when even your name becomes a dividing line, something deeper begins to stir. The calling does not fade, it intensifies, and with it comes the final pull. Not just from people, but from every attachment that once tethered you to the old version of yourself. Because the covenant cannot be crowded, and the fire cannot burn in places where compromise still lives. The covenant cannot be crowded. Lot must go. There is a moment in every divine journey where the weight of too many footsteps begins to slow your own. It does not happen all at once. It comes in the form of subtle tension. Quarrels without reason, confusion without clarity, a restlessness in your spirit that refuses to be silenced. That is how you know the separation is near. Not because you desire it, but because the covenant demands it. Abraham was promised a land, a lineage, a legacy. But as long as Lot walked beside him, the heavens stayed quiet. The land grew strained. Their herdsmen quarreled. And though Abraham loved Lot, he knew what few are willing to admit: there are people you can love deeply who still cannot come with you. The moment they parted ways, God spoke again. Not before, not during, only after. The presence of the wrong person can delay the sound of God's next instruction. Not because they are evil, but because their timeline has expired. And when the chosen ignore the expiration, everything around them begins to groan. Atmospheres grow heavy. Favor begins to stall. clarity becomes clouded. Because the promise was not made to the group, it was made to the one. To carry covenant is to carry weight, and not all shoulders were meant to bear it with you. Lot was not evil, but he was extra baggage, extra noise, extra presence in a space only meant for obedience. And God in His mercy will never allow your future to be shaped by what He never authorized. So He starts to remove. Gently at first, then suddenly, doors close, relationships shift, silence grows, until all that remains is you and the call. You may grieve it, you may question it, but heaven sees what your heart cannot. There is revelation waiting on the other side of this goodbye. There is a voice waiting to speak once the crowd clears, and there is a promise holy and heavy that will not descend until your hands are empty enough to hold it. So do not fight what God is peeling away. The covenant cannot be crowded, the vision cannot be diluted, and your destiny cannot be delayed by attachments that refuse to walk where you are called. Let them go. Let the land stretch wide again. Let the voice return. Let the silence end. Because what comes next is not about who left. It is about what is being born. There is a silence that follows separation, a stillness that feels like loss but is filled with holy weight. It lingers in the quiet moments after the crowd has gone, after the friends no longer call, after the familiar voices grow distant, and in that silence something sacred begins to speak. You were never called to be ordinary. The ache in your spirit is not confusion, it is confirmation. What feels like isolation is heaven's way of making room for revelation. The fire that consumes your comfort is the same fire that forges your name into eternity. And every tear shed in secret is known by the one who called you. Not a single goodbye has been wasted. Not one separation has been in vain. Each one has carved out space for something eternal to take root. To be chosen is to walk away, not because you do not love, but because you have heard a voice that others cannot hear. A voice that pulls you toward a mountain unseen, a promise unspoken, a weight too holy for casual hands to carry. This path may feel lonely, but it is never empty. Every step you take into obscurity is watched by eyes that never sleep. Angels walk beside you, the Spirit leads you, and heaven records every obedient footfall. So, if this message stirred something in you, if the pain of separation felt like your own, you are not alone. You are not forgotten, you are not forsaken, you are being set apart, prepared, and sent. I invite you to sit with this truth, to wrestle with it, to rest in it. And if you feel called, share your story in the comments. Let this space become a meeting ground for the chosen, a sanctuary for those who know the cost of calling. If this journey spoke to your spirit, I ask you to gently support this sacred work. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe if you sense that this is your tribe. This is more than content. It is consecration. And together we are walking a path few understand, but many are awakening to. The road ahead is narrow, but it is paved with glory. And your steps are not wasted. You are chosen. You are being prepared. And the one who called you is faithful to finish what he began.